Everybody. I'm Stephanie. This is Megan. Um, we are excited to have a chance to answer some questions and interact with you tonight. So I'm going to start out with a reading from Midnight Sun, and what I've chosen is the missing piece that I didn't have in Twilight, with the end of chapter 12 into chapter 13, which is the meadow, the actual moment when Edward walks into the sun and what happens then that is missing. And I've always wanted to have this in the book. And so I was super excited to finally be able to have this. Anyway, so starts on page 340 of Midnight Sun. Bella led the way now, no hesitation as she pushed through the hedge of ferns and into the meadow. I wished I could see her face. I could imagine how lovely the place would be on a day like this. I could smell the wildflowers, sweeter in the warmth, and hear the low burble of the stream on the far side. The insects hummed and faraway birds trilled and crooned. There were no birds nearby now. My presence was enough to frighten all the larger life from this place. She walked almost reverently into the golden light. It gilded her hair and made her fair skin glow. Her fingers trailed over the taller flowers, and I was reminded again of Persephone, springtime personified. I could have watched her for a very long time, perhaps forever, but it was too much to hope that the beauty of the place could make her forget the monster in the shadows for long. She turned, eyes wide with amazement, a wondering smile on her lips, and looked back at me, expectant. When I didn't move, she began walking slowly in my direction. She lifted one arm, offering her hand in encouragement. I wanted to be human so badly in that moment that it nearly crippled me. But I was not human, and the time had come for perfect discipline. I held my palm up, a warning. She understood, but was not afraid. Her arm dropped and she stayed where she was, waiting, curious. I took a deep breath of the forest air, consciously registering her scorching scent for the first time in hours. Even trusting Alice's visions as much as I did, I wasn't sure how there could be any more to this story. It would have to end now, wouldn't it? Bella would see me, and it would be all the things she should have been from the beginning. Terrified, disgusted, appalled, repelled, and done with me. It felt as though I would never do anything more difficult than this, but I forced my foot to lift and shifted my weight forward. I would face this head on. With all that, I couldn't bear to see the first reaction on her face. She would be kind, but it would be impossible for her to disguise that initial instant of shock and revulsion. So I would give her a moment to compose herself. I closed my eyes as I stepped into the sunlight. I felt the sun warm against my skin, and I was glad I couldn't see that either. I didn't want to look at myself now. For the longest half second I'd ever lived through, everything was silent. And then Bella screamed, "Edward!" My eyes flashed open, and I fully expected to see her running away from all I had just revealed myself to be. But she was running right at me in a collision course, her mouth open in distress. Her hands were half extended toward me, and she tripped and stumbled her way through the long grass. Her expression wasn't frightened, but it was desperate. I didn't understand what she was doing. I couldn't let her crash into me, whatever she was intending. I needed her to keep her distance. I raised my hand again, palm forward. She faltered, then wobbled in place for a moment, exuding anxiety. As I stared into her eyes, saw my reflection there, I thought perhaps I understood. Mirrored in her eyes, what I resembled most was a man on fire. Though I debunked her myths, she must have held on to them subconsciously, because she was worried, frightened for the monster rather than of it. She took a step towards me, and then hesitated when I moved a half step back. "Does that hurt you?" she whispered. Yes, I'd been right. She wasn't afraid for herself, not even now. "No," I whispered back. She stepped another foot closer, careful now. I let my hand fall. She still wanted to be closer to me. Her expression shifted as she approached, her head cocked to the side, and her eyes first narrowed, then grew huge. Even with this much space between us, I could see the effects of the light refracting off my skin, shimmering prism-like against her own. She moved another step and then another, keeping the same distance away as she slowly circled around me. I stayed completely motionless, feeling her eyes touch my skin as she moved out of my sight. Her breath came more quickly than usual, her heart pumped faster. She reappeared on my right, and now there was a tiny smile beginning to form around the edges of her lips as she completed her circle and faced me again. How could she smile? She walked closer, stopping when she was only 10 inches away. Her hand was raised, curled close to her chest, as if she wanted to reach out and touch me, but was afraid to. The sunlight shattered off my arm and whirled against her face. "Edward," she breathed. There was wonder in her voice. "Are you frightened now?" I asked quietly. It was as if my question was totally unexpected, as if it shocked her. "No." I stared into her eyes, unable to stop myself from fruitlessly trying again to hear her. She reached toward me, very slowly, watching my face. I thought perhaps she was waiting for me to tell her to stop. I didn't. Her warm fingers grazed the back of my wrist. She stared intently at the light that danced from my skin to hers. "What are you thinking?" I whispered. In this moment, the constant mystery was once again acutely painful. She shook her head slightly and seemed to struggle for the words. "I am..." She stared up into my eyes. "I didn't know." She took a deep breath. "I've never seen anything more beautiful, never imagined something so beautiful could exist." All right. So that's the little piece of the meadow that I've always wanted to have in the book. And now we will move on to questions about Midnight Sun and Twilight in general.
Can I just say first, before we get into questions, I know that Jake Abel, for those of you who don't know, he did the audio recording for Midnight Sun. It's very dreamy. We love it very much. But you could have totally done the reading.
No. I could not have talked for 5 days. I mean, 25 days and survived. It's really hard work, man. My voice, I can do like 15 minutes. That's it.
That was real good.
All right, thanks.
Okay, questions. I'm going to do my best with y'all's names, so bear with me. I did a little practicing, but I make no promises. And we're gonna try to get to as many questions as we have in the time that we have. So here we go. This is from Montserrat. Were you worried or anxious about the reaction of the fans before the announcement of the publication back in, when was that? May? Feels like 100 years ago.
Feels like a lot longer than that. I was worried. I guess I was braced for negativity. I expected, I wasn't worried that there'd be negativity. I expected people to say, "What, I'm supposed to care all this time later?" Or people just weren't going to have any response at all because I had waited for way too long and nobody cared anymore. So that it was all real positive and super enthusiastic was a shock and a really pleasant one. It was hard because we're kind of trapped indoors and we don't know what's going on. It was hard to believe it was all real. Yeah.
It felt real to those of us who were trying to keep the website from crashing.
I don't do tech stuff.
We felt very alive in that moment. that whole day and into the next day. Okay, this is from Yaleen. To most of the Twilighters, the new book is a reminder of our adolescent years, a souvenir of the coming of age of a generation. So lovely. Apart from this great nostalgia for the good old days, do you expect your readers to experience something brand new through reading this new yet familiar story?
I think there will be some new stuff. I imagine that some of you were fairly in tune with what Edward was feeling through Twilight. I don't know how much of it will be a surprise. Some of it might be. I'm still kind of waiting for people to have finished reading so I can say, what did you not expect from Edward? What seemed the wildest to you from Edward's perspective? Obviously, there's quite a bit of new flashbacks and things that happened that were off screen. So I hope that those feel new and exciting and something new to read. But I imagine there'll be a lot of nostalgia, and that's not a bad thing. I like going back to worlds that I have loved in the past. And rarely do I have a new way to look at them. I go back to Jane Austen all the time and I never get another version.
Yeah.
But I hope there's enough new to make it worth reading.
Yeah, I think too that people will learn more about other characters, not just Edward.
Yes, there is a lot. I think that the understanding of Alice's powers in particular were very limited until this point in time. Yeah. Now we see them in action. I think it's a much clearer look at it.
Jasper too.
Jasper has a lot, can do a lot more than we realized.
Okay, this question is from Sabrina. Were there any, we sort of just touched on this, were there any significant changes for this book compared to the manuscript that came out 12 years ago?
The leaked manuscript. So structurally, no, because Twilight is Twilight. So Midnight Sun has to be Midnight Sun. Like, it's going to follow it. It's not going to have a lot of changes. There are additions to that piece. There were a lot of things that I knew I would go back and do later. I didn't feel like doing it at the time. I wanted to keep pace with the story. And there's a lot about Bella that I knew I would go back to later and flesh flesh it out, build it out. So I think we get a really good look at Bella in the newer things. There's a lot of flashbacks with Edward that weren't there. And then the language is better. I just have had time to polish it and go through and reread it and find where I was repeating myself too much and polish that up, which is the whole point of not reading rough drafts because they're very imperfect.
This is from Isabella. She is wondering if it was hard, because it's been so long, was it hard for you to get in sync again with how the characters and especially Edward thought and acted in Twilight? Or was it a relief to go back to the world of vampires and romance?
I think a lot of people think because there's been such a time period that I stepped away from Midnight Sun for like 5 years, 10 years, and then wrote it all in the last 2 years up before publication. And that's not true. I did not leave. Everybody else went on with their lives, and I have not been able to leave this world. I've been working on this the whole time. There have been significant chunks of time when I was working on other books, and then but even in those times, I would still have my trusty pad of Post-its by the bed. And when I woke up in the middle of the night, I thought, oh, Edward would say this. Right. Edward would think this. Oh, Alice should have this. I would write it down. And then when I had a chance to get back, I'd go and type it in. So I was kind of always there. So there was no sense of coming back to anything. I just lived there.
Yeah.
I've been living there for a really long time.
Yeah, you would sometimes, we work together all day, every day, and just like randomly out of the blue, we wouldn't have mentioned Midnight Sun for a long time, and then you would say, I thought about Midnight Sun last night. I'd be like, yes, tell me more.
That's actually not true. She would say, stop that and get to work on this other book that she wants me to finish. She has come around on Midnight Sun.
You're gonna come after me.
Well, she's come around, and it got done, but she wanted new stuff. Yeah. And I don't blame you for that.
Yeah, well, I felt like maybe a palate cleanser is what would get you back into it. That's all. And you got it. And I came around, and I do love it now, especially Jasper. Okay, Carla, she says, in an interview, you said that writing from Edward's point of view had made you very anxious. Why did you choose to make Edward an anxious person if it made you uncomfortable sometimes?
And this is where I get to sound like a crazy person. I didn't make Edward anxious. Edward is anxious. That's how he's always been. And when I was first writing Twilight, I was aware of the fact that he was second guessing himself and overthinking everything and freaking out all the time about what he was doing to Bella's life and how he was ruining it. And that's just who he is. And a lot of times when I write characters, that's how they are to me. It's just this person, and I don't get to choose how they act. They choose how they act. And the story, the interactions that happen they write themselves. I mean, I have to write them, and sometimes I'm incredibly slow, but the things that happen are driven by who those characters are. So all of Bella and Edward's story was so much a part of Bella is who she is and Edward is who he is. And so this is how it happens with them. There's no other way. So I had to write Edward that way because that is who he is, and I don't get to change him because he exists separately from me, it feels like, although I guess that's crazy stuff. Edward is super anxious. Edward is unhappy a lot of the time. After reading Midnight Sun, I suggest reading Breaking Dawn right away to remind yourself that he gets to be happy and he gets everything he wants, and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, don't go to New Moon.
Don't read New Moon.
Do your characters come to you fully formed, or do you get pieces, like a seed of an idea for a character, and then you build it out from there?
Generally, they start as seeds, but it doesn't feel like I go and say, okay, here's this, I've got this glowing vampire, beautiful creature who also wants to kill somebody. What should I add in? It's like, as I start to write, it just is there.
Right.
And I don't create it. And some of them, Alice was 100% fully formed. Alice popped into existence as Edward's sister, and everything about her was already there. Her backstory, not entirely. I had to go back and like figure out what I wanted to do with that. But like who she is as a person, she was fully evolved by the time she came into my brain. And sometimes that happens, and that's amazing. But you can't do anything with a character like that. They are going to do what they want.
I love the magic of that.
There is a lot of magic. So that's one of the really fun things about writing. And I don't think it happens that way for everybody, but if you're one of the people who characters come to, congratulations, it's fun.
Yeah, some people from the authors that we know and have talked to, some people it's characters, some people it's dialogue, some people it's setting, mythology, that kind of thing. Okay, Joanna had two very good Midnight Sun questions. The first one is, in Midnight Sun, Alice said that if Edward had left again, he would have returned, but this time to hunt Bella. What was the reason for this happening?
Because sometimes our better self doesn't win. And Alice sees, you'll understand when you've had a chance to read Midnight Sun, a whole selection of futures. There's all these different things, and it kind of represents every decision we might make. And with Edward, I'm trying to think of the right analogy, but maybe it's like you've had a glass of wine and you're feeling pretty mellow and you're like, I really shouldn't drink that whole bottle. I'm going to put it away. But then you go and you're watching TV and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go get that bottle of wine and I'm going to finish it. Edward would be in that situation deciding that, you know what, screw it. I'm tired of being a good person. I want to taste that blood. Like I am going to go and Carla will forgive me and everybody else is screwed up. I've screwed up. Why is it such a big deal? He could have talked himself into that. And then he would have gone back to find her, not to talk to her, but to drink her blood. And he never would have known exactly what he had missed out on. Yeah.
So close.
Yeah, could have been.
Okay, her second question was, at the end of Midnight Sun, we find out that Edward was pretty dead set on leaving Bella when she was healed, or when she had healed. So had Jasper not attacked her in New Moon, would Edward have talked himself into staying, or did Jasper's attack just hasten what was already planned?
Well, there's an understanding in Midnight Sun where he talks about, he knows that there'll be a sign. What he would love to do is just float along in this limbo world where she will eventually say, you know what, I'm tired of a 17-year-old. I'm going to go to college and find a guy who I can have a normal life with. It's been great. You're gorgeous. See ya. That's his perfect version of things, is that he gets this time. But he feels like that's probably not very likely because things have already gone pretty wrong, right? They're just living their lives and all of a sudden the one vampire who shows up happens to be James, who has this whole, right? Like, what are the odds? So he's not super confident that he gets that time. And then when Jasper reacts in that very innocent situation that should have been nothing, he realizes I'm asking for it. I'm asking for her to die if I keep putting her in dangerous situations, and being around me qualifies as a dangerous situation. So that was the sign, but he knew something was going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's not safe to be around vampires.
Especially if you're a human who smells good. Yeah. Okay, Kevin M had a question, and it ties into another question from somebody else, so bear with me. In Edward as a character, he feels is built up very well in that he struggles like a lot of other teenagers, but still has a difference that he's the man who never gets old. But Kevin thinks that Bella maybe doesn't have as much of a personality, that her personality doesn't stand out as much maybe in Twilight. So how did you address that?
So we got a really good look at Edward in Twilight, because you have a person who's fallen in love with him and obsessed with him, who also thinks that there's nothing more boring than herself. Mm-hmm. So she is not concentrating on, and this is what I did today, and I made sure this girl graduated from biology because I'm a nice person. Like, this is not who Bella is. She's very self-effacing, and she doesn't think what she's doing is interesting. What Edward does, and when Edward breathes in and out, that's interesting to her. Mm-hmm. So she has this like hyper focus on him, and so we see him in a very full three-dimensional way. And we see less of her because she's not focused on herself. In Midnight Sun, we get the reverse, where Edward is hyper focused on Bella. We still get some more with him because he has a lot of more interesting life to deal with in this. Bella has led a possibly normal life. Not everybody has the same thing as her, but she's lived a human life, and she's has 17 years worth of memories. And most of them are like cooking and cleaning and going to school and taking care of her mom, and, not super exciting things to write about. So Edward has a lot of history we get to here, and that fleshes his story out more, but his focus is on Bella, and his attention is on Bella, and we see a lot more about who she is as a person. He didn't just fall in love with someone because he couldn't read her mind. He fell in love with her because of who she was. He just had to look harder, and he noticed sooner because he couldn't read her mind.
Yeah. And tied to that a little bit, Diana had a question that given how much YA literature has changed in the decade that has passed since Twilight came out, and how female protagonists are sometimes portrayed in YA books, is there anything you think you would change about Bella or any of the other girls in the saga?
Well, I mean, like I said before, I don't get to change the characters. They are who they are. And I think we have a real range of female personalities to look at. And I wouldn't change them because there are different protagonists that are different than them. And we should have all of the protagonists. Mm-hmm. We should have a million female protagonists, and they should all be their own person and make their own choices. And that necessitates that some of them are going to make choices that some people don't agree with.
Right.
And others are going to make choices that they think are great. But they should all be allowed to exist. We should have all the female protagonists and all of the differences, because women are all different, and none of us are this. When women get, it's something that women do. It drives me nuts because we're all totally different individuals, and yep. So I wouldn't change them because someone else's protagonist is different. No, they should all get to exist.
Yeah, good answer. Adriana has a question. The answer is a little bit of a downer, but there's good stuff to come, so don't worry. For those of you who don't know yet, do you plan to continue the saga from Edward's perspective? And I would, okay, let's just start there.
Okay, starting there now. So like we alluded to, writing Edward was really difficult. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that he's stressed out and unhappy. And so I have to be stressed out and unhappy to write him. So right there, that's pretty much enough. The other problem is the reason Midnight Sun took me 12 years to write is because Twilight is like a script. And I had to follow the script where every word had to be said. Every action that Bella observes has to be done. And that is the worst way to write. I am fueled by creation when I write. It's the new stuff. It's what's coming next. What new thing do I get to shape? I got to shape nothing in Midnight Sun. It was what it was. And it was like writing inside prison bars. And you could fill in the little spaces in between, but the bars don't move. Mm-hmm. I don't like writing like that, and I'm not going to do it again. I intend to only move forward. There won't be any more stories backwards. Going back to tell stories that have happened in the past. It's all just going to be moving forward from now on.
So the good news is, so a lot of people have been asking about what's next after Breaking Dawn. So a couple of people in the group, Kevin N., Joanna, Lieta, Kianzi, they had sort of similar questions. So I'm going to just pick out pieces of that. Kevin really loves the mythology and the backstories of the other characters. Do you have any plan to expand upon other characters' backstories?
As it comes up in future stories, I don't know how much of past things will become relevant, but I could. The world has a lot of things that can still be explored for sure.
What about, Joanna was wondering about exploring the different couples in the Collin family.
How so?
In their own book?
No, no, I'm not. I know there's a lot of people who love Carlisle and Esme, who love Alice and Jasper, and who want to spend more time with Em. I guess there are people who want to spend more time with Rosalie, but okay. And that's lovely, but there aren't exciting stories there. I don't want to tell the past. So I'm not going to go back and do books from their perspective. The books will go forward with Renesmee's perspective. That's the person I created to have someone to write through. So that's where I'll go with that.
I like when you talk about how a lot of people were surprised that there was a baby in Breaking Dawn.
And not really realizing what I was doing. I realized from writing it that when Bella turns into a vampire, I lose a lot of my connection to her, because when she's human and unsure of herself and surrounded by inhuman people, like I can identify with that. I can imagine what that would feel like. But then when she becomes this like super powerful, invulnerable, perfect being, that's harder for me to imagine. And I did my best with that. But writing forward from that perspective doesn't speak to me. And so I wanted a character that would be alone in who they are, that they're not one of a group, they're one of a kind, and they are stronger than some people, but still surrounded by people who are stronger than them. They don't fit in exactly right. They don't have a place in the world. That's interesting to me. That's something that can be resolved, that I can go somewhere with. So that's why I sought out a narrator for myself to move forward after Bella became a less exciting narrator.
And then I see Mercedes in the chat here is saying that she saw that that you had mentioned that there were possibly 2 more books.
That's what I think it will be. Again, everyone has picked that up in the news and been like, 2 more Twilight books in a while. And we're talking Midnight Sun time here. Like, it's going to take me a while to get back to them, because I want to do something new and create mythology and not have rules in place. I want to have new rules. But I think I'm pretty solid on what the next book would be. Don't have a title for it. I had a really hard time titling Twilight, and then the other ones came real easily, and this one I don't know.
Running out of
I know
nighttime things to
daytime things. That, I mean, I might have to go on a different path. It's a new narrator, maybe I can. So I think I know pretty solidly what that book encompasses, and then I know the end of where it all goes to. I'm not exactly sure how we get from the end of the next book to the end. And so I think it's 2, but we'll see.
It's going to be a while, though.
It is going to be a while. I'm going to write something that has a whole new mythology, a new world, and it sounds really fun.
A whole new world.
A whole new world.
We won't sing for you, don't
We're
worry.
not allowed to, probably.
I will say that for those of you who are asking for backstories, the guide, we have a show and tell. Our favorite show and tell.
This is not going to give you a book-length version of what happened to the characters, but it is going to give you some really interesting stories, and some about the vampires you probably don't care about, and some that you care about a lot. Some of the stories you'll be really familiar with, but I feel like there's a lot about Alice's that is in this book that is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also, so a while back we did a film contest with the guide, with women in film and Tongle and Lionsgate and a bunch of people. But the point was to help women get into places in film and have a chance to showcase what they could do, hopefully to get them a voice so we could have more stories told from a female perspective, which is very important to me. And they took some stories and made them into really interesting and insightful films. And if you're interested in Alice's backstory, you'll really love the winner that the Spear sisters did, that looks at how she ended up in the asylum, and it's very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to put some links up to it on my website, but you can find them on YouTube. And they're super cool.
Yeah, there's stuff on the Fickle Fish website now if you're dying, or YouTube, but there are a couple of Alice ones.
Mm-hmm.
There's some
people love Alice.
They're really fun. And the women who participated did an amazing job in writing and directing. Okay. While we're talking about the movie, I'm sorry I lost the name, but somebody had asked about a potential film or TV show for Midnight Sun.
I mean, it's always possible. I know there's a lot of people who would love to do it. There are some real hurdles, though, and I don't want to do it unless I can do it in a way that makes me happy. The original Twilight films are great, and they are lovely, and we got to have a lot of different filmmakers kind of weigh in and look at it from different angles, which is really cool. But one thing that always frustrated me is that all of our actors are human beings, and I know there aren't any options for us, but as with everything that special effects could do, they always looked to me like human beings. They didn't look like vampires, and I would love to do something where they would look and move and be inhuman. And since I can't do that live action, I am intrigued by the idea of doing that in animation. And not everybody is about animation. Megan's not a huge convert to animation.
You are making, they're gonna,
no. A lot of people think animation's not, it's for kids, right?
No, I don't think it's just for kids. It's just not my jam. But Into the Spider-Verse.
Well, and Into the Spider-Verse is what got me thinking about animation as a medium for this, because they just showed you what you could do with animation, and they were so creative and thoughtful, and I mean, just everything they did was genius. And something like that, I feel like maybe we'd be able to get it from a vampire perspective in a way that that felt true to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's impossible. I mean, Edward there'd be a constant soundtrack of people talking all the time in his head. It would be very unusual. And then would we have to have VO to get all of his? VO can be rough, man. I've seen it work, but it's also really rough. So I don't know. It would be really, really tricky. I don't think you could do it in a movie. I think it would have to be a limited series. It's too long. And I did The Host as a movie. And I loved the filmmaker. I loved the actors. I made some really good friends on that set. The caves were gorgeous. Everything looked beautiful, but we had to cut so much of the story.
Yeah.
And now that in the time that's passed, TV has really come into its own, and like you really can see how you could just not have to compromise. And so I'm intrigued by that form of storytelling.
I would love to have a full Pride and Prejudice BBC version of
The Host. So we could get Walter back. Justice for Walter.
Justice for Walter. Okay, while we're talking about The Host, I'm going to skip ahead. Wait a minute. Was there a host question on here? Yes, there is, from Javier. I'm going to skip ahead while we're talking about it. She was wondering what inspired you to write The Host.
Okay. So The Host came about, well, I think I was editing New Moon, and Midnight Sun was an all hands on deck fast edit, and it took about, 8 months. But that was pretty constant. With The Host, I mean, I was editing for much longer than that. And there were big periods of time where I would send back my manuscript after I'd done my version of it, and then they would have it for months. And I didn't want to move ahead with Twilight Things because I'd already learned that when you write too far ahead, and then you have to go back and change things, you lose everything you write. So I was like, okay, I need to stay present in New Moon and not go on to Eclipse, because if I change something, it'll ruin it. And so I wanted something else to write. And so I mean, I don't know that I was consciously looking for that. Subconsciously, I needed an outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a road trip, and the idea came to me. I don't know where it came from. I was staring at the desert as I drove with no one to talk to because I had babies in the car. And I just was thinking about like the idea of two separate people in love with one person, but they're not separated from each other. They're one person. And it just kind of spun out from there. And it was a great drive after that, because I was just like, oh, and what about this? And what if we did this? And it was exciting. I love it when new ideas come and you start building. That's the best part.
Just this little graph.
I know, I'm looking at it.
I'm in the wrong. So
yeah,
thank you.
So people love animation, but there's
thank you.
14% who agree that live action is the only way to do it.
Katie Hall says animation actually sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah. Oh, Katie, that's not a bad idea. I'm not gonna try to pronounce the name.
Studio Ghibli.
Yes.
I haven't, my sons are currently going through all the Studio Ghibli movies. I have not watched them, and I've always heard they're really good. And so that's something that's on my to-do list when I have time.
All right, Katie.
Good ideas. That's a style I prefer. I mean, I've seen clips from it. I think I prefer the more hyper-realistic, like Spider-Verse or some of the Pixar movies, but with a more serious like bent to it. So we'll see, but good ideas.
Okay, yeah. Get back on track a little here. Spinning out a smidgen. This is from Victoria. She really likes how the saga makes artistic and literary references to other works and parallels to other classic couples, and it makes the romance even more tender.
Wow.
In Midnight Sun, the pomegranate on the cover alludes to the Greek myth of Hades and Persephone, and Edward mentions parts of their story. How does that work? How does that research work into your storytelling?
It's not really a research thing. I mean, this doesn't apply so much to Midnight Sun because Edward would have read everything and have access to all kinds of studying and years of university. But with Bella, I didn't think it would be natural for a 17-year-old to pull up a bunch of esoteric information. These are things that I feel like most people are familiar with, kind of common, at least in American schools. These are books that you are assigned to
The
read.
classics.
The classics, everyone's been exposed to them. So it seemed naturally to me that Bella would see herself through those books because she's a reader, and that pieces of them would speak to her. I got more specific about her reading habits in Midnight Sun because, you know, I had an interested interrogator to work with. With Edward, I just felt like, although he has access to everything, that was the one archetypal story that he would see himself in most strongly.
And then Natasha had a question about sort of the different icons that you have on the book covers, and also how you work them into the stories. What role does mythology or your religion play into your writing?
I think that, I mean, I know that I, as a writer, I'm not sure everyone's like this. I am a sponge, and my whole life I have been absorbing the stories that I've read. I mean, religiously, I have read the Bible religiously, and I've also read it as literature for a class where we broke it apart like mythology stories and looked at archetypes. And all those things just sink into your subconscious. And then as you're writing, it's not a decision. They come into being there. Personality types that you're familiar with will sneak their way into your characters. Places that you've always wanted to go. When I wrote Twilight, I'd never been to the state of Washington, but it was just like a place I had dreamed of that was green and wet all the time and not like the desert that I lived in. And so that kind of, I didn't decide to have it there consciously. It was part of my subconscious desire to spend time in that kind of a place. And so that's where it set the story. So I don't know how much any one avenue of study has affected me. I am just an amalgam of everything I've ever read and watched and heard. It all gets twisted up in your brain. And if you're a writer, you'll find that it all comes out in strange ways. Like what you've learned comes through a kaleidoscope, and hopefully it makes something beautiful and unusual that you didn't know about yourself.
That's really nice. That's very lovely. I haven't heard you explain it that way. I cannot find the person who asked this now. I'm so sorry. The stuff is coming in. But they asked which of the Twilight covers is your favorite?
I mean, I love the original. We worked hard to get there. And there's something about the innocence of those hands, and then the darkness of the cover. And then there's this invitation, but also like a warning in the apple, right? Because we know that apples are trouble, and it's not been bitten into. So like, what is this person going to do with the apple? Are they going to take a bite? Are they not? There's a tension to that cover, but the hands are very not tense. There's a calmness to them. And I think that in some ways, I know it wasn't intentional, but to me, it feels like Bella's calmness, where she just knows what she wants. And she doesn't, Edward goes back and forth and back and forth, and Bella, she doesn't waver. And those hands are very calm, like the decision is made. And I've always, and it's been a cover that has just, it's easy to recognize. It was at the time unusual, and so it stood out. So it was a great cover for me. It really, I think, helped the book too well, because it was an inviting cover. As the other covers came out, I think we were trying to catch that magic, and we weren't always as successful. I wanted them to have meaning. I think maybe Eclipse comes the closest. It was a difficult idea to convey, the idea of kind of trying to cut ties with your life and not quite being able to do it. And somehow Richard was able to get a static image of a ribbon to feel like it's in the middle of bursting. I thought that was pretty smart. But outside of the Twilight covers, my favorite cover is The Chemist, because those are beautiful colors. And it's funny to me because a lot of people hate that cover because they hate needles. And I'm not a needle person. I pass out. I go down when I get stabbed with a needle. I was just setting up blood work today, and I'm like, well, there's a day I'm going to lose. And so but for me, it's so elegant looking. Like, even though I don't love having needles stuck through my skin, like the image is compelling. So that's what my favorite outside of Twilight.
For the Midnight Sun cover, your original idea was different than what we ended up with, or what you ended up with.
So we had originally, we're like, new book, new narrator, we can do whatever we want, we can go crazy.
There were some crazy ideas.
There were crazy ideas. And then my editor was like, hold up. My publisher actually, let's do something that ties in with the series. I'm like, fine. So threw away all that Pinterest board. Never mind. But so then we're looking for the images that feel like this. And I thought a nice comparison would be to have a hand involved again, but in a very different way. I wanted a hand crushing a pomegranate because the anger and tension in Edward is the opposite of the Twilight cover with the very calm and innocent looking hands. And we played around with that. And I actually made my son, who was 17 at the time, I have the pictures on my phone of him holding, we made fake blood out of red food dye and corn syrup. It's dripping down his wrist. And he's holding these different ways. But what happened was when we actually got into the studio doing it, it did not convey. Either there was no tension in the hand, so it just didn't say what I wanted it to, or the picture was unrecognizable. Like you really had to get close to it and look at it and be like, what is that? Oh, those are fingers around the edges. Oh, it's being crushed. Right. Okay. It just wasn't obvious. And from a distance, it made no, the image was senseless. So, and I was really heartbroken to give it up. And our other options where we had a bunch of very beautiful, pristine pomegranates against the black background, perfectly round, and they were lovely images, but just kind of empty. And I did not know what to do. And then our amazing angel, Richard, who has been the photographer on most of the covers, he was playing around with it and twisted it into the subtle shape of a heart. And he sent it through, and my first reaction was, nah.
Yeah.
And hers too, same thing. And then I went back to look at it again, and I was like, no. And I went back to look at it again, and I'm like, oh, dang, like, no, there's a feeling there. Yeah. There's something more than just the sterile image of a pomegranate, but yet it's still perfectly clear, unlike these hand images that aren't working for me. It was a real process, as obviously we've been talking for a long time about it, but I was so happy to have something that I felt in my heart, yes, this is right. Because a lot of times with covers, you're like, I'll live with it. Yeah. I'll live with it. This isn't a live with it cover. And I appreciate that very, very much.
And it came down to the last day, right?
We were making that decision. He came up with that in the 11th hour.
Yeah. So this all came together very quickly.
Sometimes things happen when they're supposed to.
Serendipitous.
And they just are the way they're going to be.
Okay, Katie's back with more good questions. You said on your site that the Twilight playlist is a very fluid thing. Would you consider doing an updated version for the songs you feel reflect it now?
I feel like the Midnight Sun playlist is my updated version. I don't know. I haven't been in Bella's version of things in a really long time. I guess I was going to say the one song is the one that Cherish did, because it's from a female voice and it's beautiful, but it's very much Edward's perspective. And so that doesn't fit either.
Cherish. Okay. Let's quickly, if you guys haven't seen it,
I put it on my website. It's there.
On Stephenie's website. A woman, her name is Cherish Janae. She wrote a song called Silence. I think it's Silence, Edward's Soliloquy. And it's about Edward and Midnight Sun. It is the perfect Midnight Sun song from his point of view. But I saw that maybe she also has a song from Bella's point of view.
Really?
I haven't heard
it. We're gonna have to investigate.
But it's a beautiful song, and she's so talented. You should
go to my website, check it out, because it does speak some real Edwardian emotions that I appreciated.
Yeah. You can download it. All that stuff. Okay, Katie has another very important question. Where do you stand on pineapple on pizza?
I don't want to make any enemies here, but I am a pass on the pineapple on pizza. I'm not really a sweet and savory mixed person. I like to keep those things separate. So
Carla has heard Cherish's song.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you know, lovely. If you listen to the words, it's like, wow, she really got him. Yeah. She channeled him.
Okay. Geraldine would like to know why. I think. She's asking about the difference between the ending of Breaking Dawn in the book and the difference in the movie.
Right, because it said something about more dramatic. Right. All right. I feel like I should be like, sit back. I'm going to tell you a story. Anyway, so Breaking Dawn, I did not want to have a fight because the outcome of that fight means most of the characters are dead on both sides. This includes Edward and Bella. So I wasn't ready to kill off my protagonists at this point. I could have said, this is the end of everything. I'm going to kill everybody and see who's standing when the dust, because I couldn't cheat the story. There was no way for a Collin win on that one. It's just not, it's not there. So, oh, there's a quiz. Sorry, I just saw the poll. No, kill it with fire. Okay. So I didn't want to write that. This was setting up a future confrontation, but the first time you have two kind of powers who are both very much into self-preservation meet up, they're not gonna like that match, right? If you came into that clearing thinking we're gonna wipe these people out, and then you realize, oh wait, and this is Arrow specifically, I might die. Well, I'm not gonna die. So it made sense to me that it would be a confrontation and a little bit of cowardice from the bully rather than an all-out fight. Hollywood agrees with you in that we got to have a fight. There, you can't have this end and not have a fight. We're going to do it. And I'm like, okay, and then kill everybody. And when I write the sequel to this, then there won't be any place to go with that. And they're like, no, we got to have a fight. So I sat down for a very, very long dinner with the writer, Melissa Rosenberg. I think we were at the Keg in Canada. And we were sitting there and hashing things out and things that would work, and we came up with a compromise. It's not a perfect compromise because obviously Alice cannot see that vision because it's full of wolves, and that bothered me, but there was no way to do it without, like, you know, was there a way we could do it where you didn't see the wolves and it was like blank spots? Is there a way to play that? It would not have been clear. None of it worked. So I came up with this version where we'll see Alice's vision. Everyone who knows the books well will know it's not real. Vampires aren't real, so you know that's okay. And then once we got over that hurdle, we're going to show it from Alice's perspective, and then pull back from it. Then we got to have the fun and kill so many people. And because it didn't count, like Carlisle's not really dead, Arrow didn't pull his head off. It was fun. Like we get to kill them all, and we get to imagine death scenes. And there was actually a big scene that was like the final scene. Where it was going to be a carousel and we were going to see everything all the way around. And unfortunately, the battle scene was just taking too long. We timed out Lord of the Rings and Narnia and all the big battle scenes. I'm like, this is dragging. We can't go on this long. So we couldn't have that scene, but it was going to be great. And you were going to see Bella and Edward die in it. Maybe that's why they didn't want it too.
Well,
but that's part of like what happens. Alice would have seen. Yeah, Arrow dies, Marcus dies, Caius dies. It's the end of the Volturi, but it's the end of the Collins.
Yeah.
Better to wait and try and do it right the next time.
One of my favorite moments in all of the Twilight years was the premiere for the last movie, because there were a lot of things we were trying to keep secret in those movies. Bella's wedding dress, the honeymoon, so many things, but that twist ending was something that we kept on locked. People couldn't bring cell phones to set. You weren't allowed, I mean, so much security. So when it happened and everybody was so excited and like had physical and audible reaction to it, it was,
there was a collective
yeah.
And then a lot of people going, what? That was fun. It was a great surprise.
Okay, Katie says, good answer on the pineapple. No pineapple.
I'm glad that you agree with me, Katie.
I feel like Katie.
I just saw one go through for Montserrat and wanted to know if it was exciting to release, except one more, the quotes. And yes, it was exciting to release the quotes from Midnight Sun on my website. And we went through the book and I had a big list of them and we tried to pick the juiciest ones, the ones that like hinted at things that would make people excited. And then we got to, where do we put them? Like, which is the first one? What's the final one we hold on to? We had a great time doing it. Lots of fun.
Eunice was there.
Really?
Yes. She said, I remember I was crying and screaming at the world premiere in the Nokia Theater. I almost broke down.
Nice. Good. Nice. That was an exciting moment. I'm glad you were there. How cool.
That's really cool. Okay, this is from Carla. You've talked about this a little bit. Do you have any other books that you're working on that are not related to Twilight? And then a follow-up, Sabrina would like to know, is one of those books the one that you mentioned back in 2010 at the fan meeting in Vancouver? We had to go back to remember that. The one about the girl who lives in a magical world.
Okay. So There are, in my computer right now, I think I counted 23 partially started books, none of them related to Twilight. So there's a bunch. Right now, I'd say, so I can't start anything right now because I'm talking about Midnight Sun all day long and I'm doing a lot of things with Midnight Sun. And so I have to put this to bed and not look at it and be reading from it and being in those characters. It's really easy for me to be in Forks. And so I have to separate myself from that world to be able to write clearly. So there's kind of 3 right now that I'm excited to dive into when my brain is clear and I can go. You know, it's kind of like I'm waiting for the green light. It's red light right now, but when it goes green. And 2 of them are brand new worlds. One of them is something I've worked on, and that's the one that I talked about. I have a good amount of it written already. There are a lot of pieces, although I keep rewriting them when I get back in because I don't know, the beginning's not gelling for me. I need something else. So that's, I may just skip the beginning and keep going with the story so that and go back to it. But that one's a pretty fleshed out world, and I'm excited about it. It's not a super happy place to live. So there is that. It's a lot of dark in that one. And then there's like a brand new fantasy, brand new world, still coming up with all the rules, that's just new this summer. I always come up with ideas when I can't write them. And so then so I've got that one that maybe, there's a lot I don't know about that one. So that's kind of an intriguing idea. There's a lot to create. And then I have this historical one that's pretty, I'm going to try and keep it pretty historical. I haven't done that before, and I always love doing things I haven't done before. That I'm intrigued by, and I'm excited by the story. But I don't know. I new world, old dresses. So
Old dress.
I bought a whole book on costumes and what people wore in the time period, and I want to have this accurate. So it's hard to choose, but well, I'll see what is most compelling when the light goes green. I'll sit down, and whatever is pulling at me, that's what I'll work on.
Sabrina, if you were at that event, tell us in the chat, because I'm curious, because we forgot.
Yeah, I don't know what I said.
Well, we forgot we were filming Breaking Dawn at the time, so we were both
we
a
were
little
12 shades of loopy.
Okay, this is the last question. We are over on our time. Okay, Mercedes would like to know, if you could change one aspect of your Twilight experience, what would you change?
So, you know, there have been a couple things that we talked about. The leak wasn't great. I am a naturally shy person, and being the center of attention is a challenge. And I'm fine when I'm there, but like knowing it's going to happen, I'm going to be on a stage. It's any of you that have fear of public speaking know exactly what I'm talking about. So there's those little things, but I mean, overall, how could you change anything? It's been amazing. I wrote a story that I loved, and other people loved it for some reason. It wasn't just me, and all of a sudden they're playing in this world that I created, and we're all there together, and that's amazing. And then people started making friends. Mm-hmm. We made friends through Twilight, and it's been such an important part of my life, just this friendship. And everybody has had that experience. And you know, so you have that, and then you have people who write to me and say, I didn't like reading, and my teacher gave me this book, and now I'm reading all these other things that I wouldn't have read without it. And I'm like, creating readers, creating writers. None of that did I expect. I didn't expect I would get movies and Barbies and all kinds of crazy things, costumes, and I have a closet full of merch and like all these weird things that have just been icing on what was a pretty good cake already. The cake was just getting to write a story I loved, and then everything else on top of it. Yeah, how can you change that? It's just, I mean, it's too amazing. I would wish for every writer to get the experience that I had writing. It's not realistic that everyone's going to have like all the other stuff, but really the writing was the best part, and everything else has just been this like wonderful, like, really, there's more? It's been pretty amazing. And of course, people who like the books and who show up to listen to me talk is all part of that. Like, that people care about this world is an amazing gift for me. So thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, there are lots of people saying how much the book means to them. Okay, guys, we're gonna get in trouble. We went way far over. You guys were really fun.
Yes, fun. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And hopefully, fingers crossed, the world goes back to normal, it becomes safe again, and I can actually come and visit places where people live instead of talking at you through the computer. I would much rather be where you are. So we'll hope that happens.
Okay.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you soon.